Before I start this story, I just want you to know that it's for educational purpose, and I mean no disrespect to anyone that I talk about in this case, and I upload once or twice a week. Simpson was born in 1947 in San Francisco, California. Simpson was a son of Eunice, an administrator at a psychiatric ward, and Jimmy Lee Simpson, a cook, Federal Reserve Bank employee, and a custodian for both a bank and a private club. His father was also a well-known drag queen in the Bay Area. Later in life, Jimmy Simpson announced that he was gay. He died of AIDS in 1986. Simpson's maternal grandparents were from Louisiana. His aunt gave him the name Orenthal, which she said was the name of a French actor she liked. He was called OJ from birth and did not know that Orenthal was his given name until a teacher read it in 3rd grade. Simpson had one brother, Melvin Leon Truman Simpson, one living sister, Shirley Simpson Baker, and one deceased sister, Carmelita Simpson Durio. Simpson grew up in San Francisco and lived with his family in the housing projects of the low-income Potrero Hill neighborhood. As a child, Simpson developed rickets and wore braces on his legs until the age of 5, giving him his bow-legged stance. He earned money by scalping tickets and collecting seat cushions at Kazar Stadium. After his parents separated in 1952, when Simpson was 4, he and siblings were raised by their mother. In his early teenage years, Simpson joined a street gang called the Persian Warriors and was briefly incarcerated at the San Francisco Youth Guidance Center. His future wife Marguerite, who he dated in high school, described him as really an awful person then. After his 3rd arrest, Simpson happened to meet with baseball star Willie Mays, who encouraged the youth to avoid trouble. He said it helped persuade him to reform. At Galileo High School, now Galileo Academy of Science and Technology, in San Francisco, Simpson played for the school football team, the Galileo Lions. Simpson then earned money by organizing dances and charging admission. He graduated in 1965. Simpson gained an athletic scholarship to the University of Southern California, where he played running back in 1967 and 1968. Simpson led the nation in rushing in 1967 when he ran for 1,451 yards and scored 11 touchdowns. He also led the nation in rushing the next year with 355 carries for 1,709 yards. In 1967, he starred in the 1967 USC vs. UCLA football game and was a Heisman Trophy candidate as a junior, but he did not win the award. His 64-yard touchdown run in the 4th quarter tied the game, with the PAT the margin of victory. This was the biggest play in what is regarded as one of the greatest football games of the 20th century. Another dramatic touchdown in the same game is the subject of the Arnold Freberg oil painting, O.J. Simpson Breaks for Daylight. Simpson also won the Walter Camp Award in 1967 and was a 2-time consensus All-American. He ran in the USC Sprint Relay Quartet that broke the world record at the NCAA Track Championships in Provo, Utah in June 1967. In 1968, he rushed for 1,709 yards and 22 touchdowns, earning the Heisman Trophy, the Maxwell Award, and the Walter Camp Award that year. He still holds the record for the Heisman's largest margin of victory, defeating the runner-up by 1,750 points. In the 1969 Rose Bowl, where number 2 USC faced number 1 Ohio State, Simpson ran for 171 yards, including an 80-yard touchdown run in a 16-27 loss. Simpson was drafted by the AFL's Buffalo Bills, who got first pick in the 1969 AFL-NFL Common Draft after finishing in 1968. Early in his professional football career, Simpson struggled on poor Buffalo teams, averaging only 622 yards per season for his first 3. He first rushed for more than 1,000 yards in 1972, gaining a total of 1,251. In 1973, Simpson rushed for a record 2,003 yards, becoming the first player ever to pass the 2,000-yard mark, and scored 12 touchdowns. Simpson gained more than 1,000 rushing yards for each of his next 3 seasons. From 1972 to 1976, Simpson averaged 1,540 rushing yards per 14-game season, 5.1 yards per carry, and he won the NFL rushing title 4 times. Simpson had the best game of his career during the Thanksgiving game against the Detroit Lions on November 25, 1976, when he rushed for a then-record 273 yards on 29 attempts and scoring 2 touchdowns. Simpson's 1977 season in Buffalo was cut short by injury. Before the 1978 season, the Bills traded Simpson to the San Francisco 49ers for a second-round draft pick, where he played 2 unremarkable seasons. Simpson gained 11,236 rushing yards, placing him second on the NFL's all-time rushing list. He now stands at 17th. He was named NFL Player of the Year in 1973, and played in 6 Pro Bowls. He was the only player in NFL history to rush for over 2,000 yards in a 14-game season, and he's the only player to rush for over 200 yards in 6 different games in his career. Simpson was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1985, his first year of eligibility. Simpson acquired the nickname Juice as a play on OJ, an informal abbreviation for orange juice. Juice is also a colloquial synonym for electricity or electrical power, and hence a metaphor for any powerful entity. The Bills' offensive line at Simpson's peak was nicknamed the Electric Company. Even before his retirement from football and in the NFL, Simpson embarked on a successful film career with parts in films such as the television miniseries Roots, and the dramatic motion pictures The Cassandra Crossing, Capricorn 1, The Klansman, The Towering Inferno, and the comedic Back to the Beach and The Naked Gun trilogy. In 1979, he started his own film production company, Oriental Productions, which dealt mostly in made-for-TV fare such as the family-oriented Goldie and the Boxer films with Melissa Michelson and Cocaine and Blue Eyes, the pilot for a proposed detective series on NBC. NBC was considering whether to air Frogman, another series starring Simpson, when his arrest canceled the project. Simpson's amiable persona and natural charisma landed him numerous endorsement deals. He was a spokesman for the Hertz rental car company. He would be depicted running through airports, as if to suggest he was back on the football field. Simpson was also a longtime spokesman for Pioneer Chicken and owned 2 franchises, one of which was destroyed during the 1992 Los Angeles riots, as well as Honey Baked Ham, the PX Corporation, and Calistoga Water Company's line of Napa Natural soft drinks. He also appeared in comic book ads for Dingo cowboy boots. Besides his acting career, Simpson worked as a commentator for Monday Night Football and the NFL on NBC. He also appeared in the audience of Saturday Night Live during its 2nd season and hosted an episode during its 3rd season. On June 24, 1967, Simpson married Marguerite L. Whitley. Together, they had 3 children, Arnell L. Simpson, Jason Lamar Simpson, and Aaron Lashwan Simpson. In August 1979, Aaron drowned in the family swimming pool. Simpson met Nicole Brown in 1977 while she was working as a waitress at a Beverly Hills nightclub called the Daisy. Although still married to his first wife, Simpson began dating Brown. Simpson and Marguerite divorced in March 1979. During the 1984 Summer Olympics torch relay, Simpson carried the torch on Santa Monica's California Incline Road, running behind Brown. Brown and Simpson were married on February 2, 1985, 5 years after his retirement from professional football. The couple had 2 children, Sydney Brooke Simpson and Justin Ryan Simpson. The marriage lasted 7 years. Brown claimed that by the end of 1989, police had visited the couple's house 8 times for domestic violence calls, and they did not help her in any of them. On December 31, Brown phoned the police, saying that she thought Simpson was going to kill her. She was found by officers hiding in the bushes outside their home, badly beaten and half-naked. Authorities said Simpson had punched, slapped, and kicked her. He pleaded no contest to spousal abuse. A family friend claimed that Simpson had told Brown's friends that if he ever caught her with anyone, he would kill her. Brown filed for divorce on February 25, 1992, citing irreconcilable differences. This was after finding out about an alleged year-long affair Simpson had had with a model. Reports suggest that in 1993, after the divorce, Brown and Simpson made an attempt at reconciliation. In October, Brown called the police to report Simpson being violent again, after he allegedly found a photo of a man Brown had dated while they were broken up. Again, officers intervened. The two broke up again, seemingly permanently, in May 1994. On June 12, 1994, O.J. Simpson's ex-wife Nicole Brown Simpson was found brutally murdered outside of her home in Los Angeles. But she wasn't the only victim discovered at the scene. Brown Simpson's friend, Ron Goldman, was also found murdered on the property. Both had been fatally stabbed. O.J. Simpson, a former professional football player, was soon charged with the murders in the so-called trial of the century. Many Americans were drawn to the most sensational aspects of the case: fame, racial dynamics, and the tumultuous relationship between Simpson and his ex-wife. Through it all, Ron Goldman's family feared their loved one would be forgotten, and they became determined to make sure that didn't happen. Born on July 2, 1968, Ronald Lyle Goldman grew up in Buffalo Grove, Illinois. His parents divorced in 1974, and he and his sister Kim were raised by their father Fred in a Jewish household. He graduated from Adlai Stevenson High School and briefly attended Illinois State University before dropping out. By the late 1980s, Goldman had relocated to Southern California, where his family had moved. There, the once quiet and shy young man embraced the fast-paced lifestyle of Los Angeles, enjoying activities like surfing, beach volleyball, and nightclubbing. He took some classes at Pierce College, but he mostly devoted his time to finding his way in the new city. To make a living, he held a number of jobs as a waiter, tennis instructor, nightclub promoter, and model. Wherever he went, Goldman was known for his kindness and helpfulness. His friend recalled, he would help anyone. He was the kind of guy who just gave unconditionally. His ex-girlfriend remembered, he was a very sweet, honest, faithful guy when we were together. And his sister said, the one thing you could say about him is, he's really good with people. People are just drawn to him. One of those people was Nicole Brown Simpson, the ex-wife of former professional football player O.J. Simpson. Goldman reportedly met Brown Simpson for the first time while he was out with his friends at a local Starbucks. The group ran into Brown Simpson there enough that she eventually formed a friendship with all of them, including Goldman. Just before Ron Goldman's death, he was working at a restaurant called Mezzaluna, located in the Los Angeles neighborhood of Brentwood. On June 12, 1994, Nicole Brown Simpson's mother was dining there, and accidentally left her prescription sunglasses behind. So Goldman went to Brown Simpson's home that night to drop the sunglasses off. Instead, the 25-year-old was greeted with a horrific crime scene at Bundy Drive. It's unclear whether Goldman arrived at the home while Brown Simpson was being killed or right after the murder. But what is clear is that he ran toward her instead of trying to flee the property, and that he put up a strong fight against the killer. But despite Goldman's bravery and athleticism, his murderer was armed with a knife, and Goldman was ultimately stabbed over 24 times before he died. Brown Simpson was also stabbed to death. The bloody bodies were discovered around midnight, after Brown Simpson's neighbors heard her Akita dog howling. They were shocked to see the dog running up and down the road with bloodied paws and approached Brown Simpson's home to check on her. It was then that they realized that a gruesome double murder had taken place, and they immediately called 911. The knife used was never found. Soon after police learned that Nicole Brown Simpson had been murdered, they began to suspect O.J. Simpson. Not only was he her ex-husband, but the two were known to have had a turbulent relationship. Brown Simpson had reported him to the police multiple times for domestic violence, and at one point during the relationship, he was charged with spousal abuse. He ultimately pled no contest to the charge and was sentenced to 120 hours of community service, 2 years of probation, and a $700 fine. The fact that Brown Simpson had been murdered alongside a male friend, Ron Goldman, only made police more suspicious that Brown Simpson's ex-husband had been responsible. He maintained that on the 12th, he had been at home, waiting for a limousine to take him to an airport for a flight to Chicago. After police gathered all the evidence, charges were filed and a warrant was signed for Simpson's arrest. Simpson, in agreement with his attorneys, was scheduled to turn himself in at approximately 11 a.m. to the Parker Center Police Headquarters on the morning of June 17. Simpson failed to turn himself in, and he later became the subject of a low-speed pursuit by police while riding as a passenger in a white 1993 Ford Bronco SUV, a vehicle owned and being driven by his former teammate and longtime friend Al Cowlings. According to Cowlings, Simpson was armed in the back of the vehicle with a pistol, holding it to his head and threatening to shoot himself if he was not taken back to his Brentwood estate. This caused the responding California Highway Patrol officers to pursue with extreme caution. The police closed the nearby highways. As Cowlings rode, Simpson's lawyer Robert Kardashian publicly released a letter from him, saying, "Don't feel sorry for me. I've had a great life, great friends. Please think of the real OJ and not this lost person." TV stations interrupted coverage of the 1994 NBA Finals to broadcast the incident live. With an estimated audience of 95 million people, the event was described as the most famous ride on American shores since Paul Revere's. Tens of thousands of people gathered on Los Angeles streets and highways to view the chase. He was arrested shortly before 9 p.m. The incident likely increased sales of the Ford Bronco by an additional 7,000 purchases in 1994 compared to 1993. Simpson reportedly demanded that he be allowed to speak to his mother before he would surrender. The chase ended at 8 p.m. at his Brentwood home, 50 miles, 80 kilometers, later, where his son Jason ran out of the house to greet him. After remaining in the Bronco for about 45 minutes, Simpson was allowed to go inside for about an hour. A police spokesman stated that he spoke to his mother and drank a glass of orange juice, resulting in laughter from the reporters. Shapiro arrived and a few minutes later, Simpson surrendered to authorities. In the Bronco, the police found $8,000 in cash, a change of clothing, a loaded .357 Magnum, a passport, family pictures, and a fake goatee and mustache. Simpson had hired a team of high-profile lawyers, including F. Lee Bailey, Robert Shapiro, Alan Dershowitz, Robert Kardashian, Gerald Ullman, the Dean of Law at Santa Clara University, Carl E. Douglas, and Johnny Cochran. Attorneys specializing in DNA evidence, Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, were hired to attempt to discredit the prosecution's DNA evidence, and they argued that Simpson was the victim of police fraud and what they termed as sloppy internal procedures that contaminated the DNA evidence. Simpson's defense was said to cost between $3 million and $6 million. Simpson's defense team, dubbed the Dream Team by reporters, argued that LAPD Detective Mark Furman had planted evidence at the crime scene. LAPD criminalist Dennis Fung also faced heavy scrutiny. In all, 150 witnesses gave testimony during the trial. Even with no witnesses to the murders, the prosecution presented a very strong case. Supported by DNA evidence, they fully expected a conviction. From the physical evidence collected, the prosecution speculated that Simpson drove over to Nicole Brown's house on the evening of June 12 with the intention of killing her. They speculated that Nicole, after putting her two children to bed and while getting ready to go to bed herself, opened the front door of her house after either responding to a knock on the front door or after hearing a noise outside, where Simpson grabbed her before she could scream and attacked her with a knife. Forensic evidence from the Los Angeles County coroner suggested that Ron Goldman arrived at the front gate to the townhouse sometime during the assault, where the assailant apparently attacked him and stabbed him repeatedly in the neck and chest with one hand while restraining him with an arm chokehold. According to the prosecution's account, as Nicole Brown was found lying face down, the assailant, after finished with Goldman, pulled her head back using her hair, put his foot on her back, and slit her throat with a knife, severing her carotid artery. They then argued that Simpson left a trail of blood from the condo to the alley behind it. There was also testimony that 3 drops of Simpson's blood were found on the driveway near the gate to his house on Rockingham Drive. According to the prosecution, Simpson was last seen in public at 9:36 p.m. that evening when he returned to the front gate of his house with Brian Cato Kalin, a bit-part actor and family friend who lived with Nicole until he was given the use of a guest house on Simpson's estate. Simpson was not seen again until 10:54 p.m., an hour and 18 minutes later, when he came out of the front door of his house to a waiting limousine hired to take him to Los Angeles International Airport, LAX, to fly to a Hertz convention in Chicago. Both the defense and prosecution agreed that the murders took place between 10:15 and 10:40 p.m., with the prosecution saying that Simpson drove his white Bronco the 5 minutes to and from the murder scene. They presented a witness in the area of Bundy Drive who saw a car similar to Simpson's Bronco speeding away from the area at 10:35 p.m. According to his testimony, limousine driver Alan Park arrived at Simpson's estate at 10:25 p.m. Driving past the Rockingham Gate, he did not see Simpson's white Bronco parked at the curb. Park testified that he had been looking for and had seen the house number, and the prosecution presented exhibits to show that the position in which the Bronco was found the next morning was right next to the house number, implying that Park would surely have noticed the Bronco if it had been there at that time. According to Simpson's version of events, the Bronco had been parked in that position for several hours. Meanwhile, Kato Kalin was on the phone to his friend, Rachel Ferrara. Park parked opposite the Ashford Gate, then drove back to the Rockingham Gate to check which driveway would have the best access for the limo. Deciding that the Rockingham entrance was too tight, he returned to the Ashford Gate and began to buzz the intercom at 10:40, getting no response. After looking through the gate and seeing the house dark with no lights on, save for a dim light coming from one of the second-floor windows, which was Simpson's bedroom, Park then made a series of phone calls from his cellular to his bosses, Dale St. John, pager, and then to his home, trying to get St. John's home number from his mother to try to get the phone number for Simpson's house. At approximately 10:50, Kato Kalin, who was still on the phone to Rachel Ferrara, heard 3 thumps against the outside wall of his guest house. Kalin hung up the phone and ventured outside to investigate but decided not to venture directly down the dark south pathway where the thumps came from. Instead, he walked to the front of the property where he saw Alan Park's limousine outside the Ashford Gate. At the same time, Park saw Kalin come from the back of the property to the front. Park testified that he saw a tall black man of Simpson's height and build enter the front door of the house from the driveway area, after which lights went on and Simpson finally answered Park's call, explaining that he had overslept and would be at the front gate soon. Kalin opened the front gate to let Park onto the estate grounds, and Simpson came out of his house through the front door a few minutes later. Both Kalin and Park helped Simpson put his belongings, which were already outside the front door when Park drove up to the front of Simpson's house, in the trunk of the limo for the ride to the airport. Both Kalin and Park remarked in their testimony that Simpson looked agitated, but other witnesses, such as the ticket clerk at Los Angeles International Airport who checked Simpson onto the plane and a few others, including a flight attendant who was also called to testify, said that Simpson looked and acted perfectly normal. Conflicting testimony, such as this, was to be a recurring theme throughout the trial. Simpson's initial claim that he was asleep at the time of the murders was replaced by a series of different stories. According to the defense lawyer Johnny Cochran, Simpson had never left his house that night and that he was alone in his house, packing to travel to Chicago. Cochran claims that Simpson went outside through the back door to hit a few golf balls into the children's sandbox in the front garden, one or more of which made the 3 loud thumps on the wall of Kalin's bungalow. Cochran produced a potential alibi witness, Rosa Lopez, a neighbor Spanish-speaking housekeeper, who testified that she had seen Simpson's car parked outside his house at the time of the murders. But Lopez's testimony, which was not presented to the jury, was pulled apart under intense cross-examination by Marcia Clark, who was a prosecutor, when Ms. Lopez was forced to admit that she could not be sure of the precise time she saw Simpson's white Bronco outside his house. Ms. Lopez was interviewed in English, without an interpreter present. Later, the defense tried to claim that Simpson could not be physically capable of carrying out the murders, for Ronald Goldman was a fit young man who put up a fierce struggle against his assailant. O.J. Simpson was a 46-year-old former football player with chronic arthritis, which had left him with scars on his knees from old football injuries. But Marcia Clark produced into evidence an exercise video that Simpson made 2 years earlier, which showed that, despite some physical conditions, Simpson was anything but frail. The prosecution also called Nicole's sister, Denise, to the witness stand where she tearfully testified that on many occasions in the 1980s, she witnessed Simpson pick up his wife and hurl her against a wall, then physically throw her out of their house after an argument. Her testimony was punctuated by a barrage of defense objections and sidebar conferences with the judge. Then the prosecution turned to the events of the evening of June 12, 1994, where Karen Lee Crawford, who was the manager of the Mezzaluna restaurant where Nicole ate that Sunday night, was called to testify, where she recounted that Mrs. Simpson's mother phoned the restaurant at 9:37 p.m. about her daughter's lost eyeglasses, and how Miss Crawford found them, put them in a white envelope, and how waiter Ron Goldman departed from the restaurant after his shift was over to drop them off at Nicole's house at 9:50 p.m. Nicole's neighbor, Pablo Fineves, testified about hearing a very distinctive barking and plaintive wail of a dog at around 10 to 15 minutes after 10 p.m. while he was at home watching the 10 o'clock news on his TV set. Eva Stein, another neighbor, testified about a very loud and persistent barking sound also at around 10:15 p.m. that kept her from going back to sleep. Neighbor Stephen Schwab testified that while he was walking his dog in the area near Nicole's house at around 10:30 p.m., he noticed a wandering and agitated Akita dog trailing its leash with bloody paws, which after examining, found the dog uninjured. Schwab told about taking the dog to another neighbor friend of his, Sukra Bozteep, who testified that he took the Akita dog into his home where the dog became more agitated. Bozteep took the dog for a walk at approximately 11 p.m. and testified that the dog tugged on its leash and led him to Nicole's house. There he discovered Nicole Simpson's dead body. Minutes later, Bozteep flagged down a passing patrol car. The police officer was the first officer at the crime scene. He testified that he found a woman in a black dress, barefoot, and lying face down in a puddle of blood on the walkway that led to the front door of her house. Then he saw Goldman's body lying on its side beside a tree a short distance away off the walkway. He also described seeing a white envelope, which was later proven to contain Nicole's glasses that had been left at the restaurant. He also saw Goldman's beeper, a black leather glove, and a dark blue knit ski cap on the ground near the bodies. On Sunday, February 12, 1995, a long motorcade traveled into Brentwood where the judge, jurors, prosecutors, and defense lawyers made a 2-hour inspection of the crime scene, and then a 3-hour tour of O.J. Simpson's Rockingham estate. Simpson, under guard by several officers but not wearing handcuffs, waited outside the crime scene in an unmarked police car, but was permitted to enter his Rockingham house. A detective testified that when he called Simpson in Chicago to tell him of his ex-wife's murder that Simpson sounded shocked and upset, but was oddly unconcerned about how she died. Another detective testified that Nicole was probably killed first because the bottoms of her bare feet were clean, implying that she was struck before any blood flowed. This was a key point, that Simpson might have set out to kill Nicole, whereas Goldman inadvertently stumbled upon the scene and prompted Simpson to kill him too. In cross-examining, detectives proposed 2 hypotheses for what happened at the murder scene. First, he suggested that one, or more, drug dealers encountered Nicole Simpson while looking for her friend and house guest, Faye Resnick, an admitted cocaine abuser. In the second hypothesis, he suggested that an assassin, or assassins, followed Goldman to the South Bundy house to kill him. Samples from bloody footprints leading away from the bodies and from the back gate of the condominium were tested for DNA matches. Initial polymerase chain reaction testing did not rule out Simpson as a suspect. In more precise restriction fragment length polymorphism tests, matches were found between Simpson's blood and blood samples taken from the crime scene, both the footprints and the gate samples. Police criminalist Dennis Fung testified that this DNA evidence put Simpson at Nicole Brown's townhouse at the time of the murders. But in cross-examination by Barry Scheck, which lasted 8 full days, most of the DNA evidence was questioned. Dr. Robin Cotton, of Cellmark Diagnostics, testified for 6 days. Blood evidence had been tested at 2 separate laboratories, each conducting different tests. Despite that safeguard, it emerged during the cross-examination of Fung and the other laboratory scientists that the police scientist Andrea Mazzola, who collected blood samples from Simpson to compare with evidence from the crime scene, was a trainee who carried the vial of Simpson's blood around in her lab coat pocket for nearly a day before handing it over as an exhibit. While 2 errors had been found in the history of DNA testing at Cellmark, one of the testing laboratories, in 1988 and 1989, the errors were found during quality control tests and had not occurred since. In the 1988 test, one of the companies hired for DNA consulting by Simpson's defense also made the same error. What should have been the prosecution's strong point became their weak link amid accusations that bungling police technicians handled the blood samples with such a degree of incompetence as to render the delivery of accurate and reliable DNA results almost impossible. The prosecution argued that they had made the DNA evidence available to the defense for its own testing, and if the defense attorneys disagreed with the prosecution's tests, they could have conducted their own testing on the same samples. The defense had chosen not to accept the prosecution's offer. On May 16, Gary Sims, a California Department of Justice criminalist who helped establish the Department of Justice's DNA laboratory, testified that a glove found at Simpson's house tested positive for a match of Goldman's blood. In 1983, LAPD Detective Mark Furman was interviewed by Dr. Ira Brent in relation to a disability claim for work-related stress. Mark Furman confided to Brent that he beat up suspects, and that he blacked out and became a wild man. In 1984, Furman stopped a young black man named Jarvis Bowers for jaywalking, put him in a chokehold and threatened his life. This happened in front of a movie theater in a predominantly white area with several witnesses. This incident cost Furman a day's pay. In March 1995, Furman testified to driving over to Simpson's house to question him on the night of the two murders and, after getting no response after buzzing the intercom of the house which was empty, scaled one of the walls and found blood marks on the driveway of Simpson's home, as well as a black leather glove on the premises near the location of Kylan's bungalow, which had blood of both murder victims on it as well as Simpson's. Despite an aggressive cross-examination by F. Lee Bailey, Furman denied on the stand that he was racist or had used the word nigger to describe black people in the 10 years prior to his testimony. But a few months later, the defense played audio tapes of Furman repeatedly using the word 41 times in total. The tape had been made in 1986 by a young North Carolina screenwriter named Laura McKinney. She had interviewed Furman for a screenplay she was developing on police officers. The Furman tapes became one of the cornerstones of the defense's case that Furman's testimony lacked credibility. In September, Furman was called back to the witness stand by the defense to answer more questions about the discovery of the blood marks and leather glove that he supposedly found on Simpson's property hours after the murders took place. When questioned by Simpson attorney Gerald Ullman, Furman, with his lawyer standing by his side, pleaded the Fifth Amendment against self-incrimination to avoid further questioning after his integrity was challenged at this point. The prosecution told the jury in closing arguments that Furman was indeed a racist, but that this should not detract from the evidence showing Simpson's guilt. Furman's testimony resulted in his indictment on one count of perjury, to which he later pled no contest. One dark leather glove was found at the crime scene, its match found near Cato Kalin's guest house behind Simpson's Rockingham Drive estate. Kalin testified that he had heard thumps in the night in the same area around the guest house the night of the murder. Brown had bought Simpson 2 pairs of this type of glove in 1990. Both gloves, according to the prosecution, contained DNA evidence from Simpson, Brown and Goldman, with the glove at Simpson's house also containing a long strand of blonde hair similar to Brown's. On June 15, 1995, defense attorney Johnny Cochran goaded assistant prosecutor Christopher Darden into asking Simpson to put on the leather glove that was found at the scene of the crime. The prosecution had earlier decided against asking Simpson to try on the gloves because the glove had been soaked in blood, according to prosecutors, from Simpson, Brown and Goldman, and frozen and unfrozen several times. Darden was advised by Clark and other prosecutors not to ask Simpson to try on the glove, but to argue through experts that in better condition, the glove would fit. Instead, Darden decided to have Simpson try on the glove. The leather glove seemed too tight for Simpson to put on easily, especially over the latex gloves he wore underneath. Ullman came up with and Cochran repeated a quip he had used several times in relation to other points in his closing arguments: "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." On June 22, 1995, Assistant Prosecutor Christopher Darden told Judge Lance Ito of his concerns that Simpson has arthritis, and we looked at the medication he takes, and some of it is anti-inflammatory, and we are told he has not taken this stuff for a day, and it caused swelling in the joints and inflammation in his hands. The prosecution also stated their belief that the glove shrank from having been soaked in blood and later testing. A photo was presented during the trial showing Simpson wearing the same type of glove that was found at the crime scene. Prosecutors contended that the presence of O.J. Simpson's blood at the crime scene was the result of blood dripping from cuts on the middle finger of his left hand. Police noted his wounds on June 13, 1994, and asserted that these were suffered during the fatal attack on Ronald Goldman. However, the defense noted that none of the gloves found had any cuts. Plus, both prosecution and defense witnesses testified to not seeing any cuts or wounds of any kind on Simpson's hands in the hours after the murders took place. The defense also alleged that Furman may have planted the glove at Simpson's house after taking it from the crime scene, and that the analysis finding that the hair could be Brown's could not be reliable. The prosecution contended that this was not the case, pointing out that by the time Furman had arrived at the Simpson home after leaving the Nicole Brown's home, the crime scene had already been combed over by several officers for almost 2 hours, and none had noticed a second glove at the scene. In his first round of testimony, Furman answered no when asked by F. Lee Bailey if he had planted any evidence at Simpson's house. In his second round of testimony, Furman took the Fifth Amendment when asked the same question. In closing arguments, Darden ridiculed the notion that police officers might have wanted to frame Simpson. He questioned why, if the LAPD was against Simpson, they went to his house 8 times on domestic violence calls without arresting him before eventually citing him for abuse in 1989, and why they then waited 5 days to arrest him for the 1994 murders. Cochran's jury summation compared Furman, proven to have repeatedly referred to African Americans as niggers and to have boasted of beating young African Americans in his role as a police officer, to Adolf Hitler, a technique which was later criticized by Robert Shapiro and by at least one juror, as well as Ron Goldman's father, Fred Goldman. Cochran called Furman a genocidal racist, a perjurer, America's worst nightmare and the personification of evil. Furman later pleaded nolo contendere to felony charges of perjury, arising from his testimony in Simpson's trial. Fears grew that race riots would erupt all over Los Angeles and the rest of the country if Simpson were convicted of the murders, similar to the 1992 riots following the acquittal of 4 police officers for beating black motorist Rodney King 3 years earlier. As a result, all LA police officers were put on 12-hour shifts, and a line of over 100 police officers on horseback surrounded the LA County Courthouse on the day of the verdict, in case of rioting by the crowd. One part of the murder case that was never brought up was the broadcast of the 2-hour-long film pilot for Frogman, and the 18-like adventure series starring Simpson, that Warner Brothers Television completed in 1994, a few months before the murders. NBC had not yet decided on whether to order the series when Simpson's arrest canceled the project. While searching his home, the police obtained a videotaped copy of the pilot as well as the script and dailies. Although the prosecution investigated reports that Simpson, who played the leader of a group of former United States Navy SEALs, received a fair amount of military training, including use of a knife, for Frogman, and there is a scene in which he holds a knife to the throat of a woman, it was not introduced as evidence during the trial. The trial culminated after 11 months on October 3, 1995, when the jury rendered a verdict of not guilty for the 2 murders. An estimated 100 million people nationwide tuned in to watch or listen to the verdict announcement. The jury deliberation lasted 3 hours. By the end, the trial produced 126 witnesses, 1,105 items of evidence and 45,000 pages of transcripts. Simpson was released after 474 days in custody. Following Simpson's acquittal of criminal charges, the families of Ron Goldman and of Nicole Brown Simpson filed a civil lawsuit against Simpson. Daniel Petroselli represented plaintiff Fred Goldman, Ronald Goldman's father, while Robert Baker represented Simpson. Superior Court Judge Hiroshi Fujisaki presided, and he barred television and still cameras, radio equipment, and courtroom sketch artists from the courtroom. The trial excluded discussion of racial issues, which were considered inflammatory and speculative. On October 23, 1996, opening statements were made, and on January 16, 1997, both sides rested their cases. On February 5, 1997, a civil jury in Santa Monica, California, unanimously found Simpson liable for the wrongful death of and battery against Goldman, and battery against Brown. The Brown family had not filed a wrongful death claim. Simpson was ordered to pay $33,500,000 in damages, $8.5 million in compensatory damages to the Goldman family, and $12.5 million in punitive damages to each family. His net worth at the time was $11 million. In September 2007, a group of men led by Simpson entered a room at the Palace Station Hotel Casino and took sports memorabilia at gunpoint, which resulted in Simpson being questioned by police. Simpson admitted to taking the items, which he said had been stolen from him, but denied breaking into the hotel room. He also denied that he or anyone else carried a gun. He was released after questioning. 2 days later, however, Simpson was arrested and initially held without bail. Along with 3 other men, Simpson was charged with multiple felony counts, including criminal conspiracy, kidnapping, assault, robbery, and using a deadly weapon. Bail was set at $125,000, with stipulations that Simpson have no contact with the co-defendants and that he surrender his passport. Simpson did not enter a plea. Simpson faced a possible life sentence with parole on the kidnapping charge, and mandatory prison time for armed robbery. On December 5, 2008, Simpson was sentenced to a total of 33 years in prison with the possibility of parole in about 9 years. On September 4, 2009, the Nevada Supreme Court denied a request for bail during Simpson's appeal. On July 31, 2013, the Nevada Parole Board granted Simpson parole on some convictions, but his imprisonment continued based on the weapons and assault convictions. The board considered Simpson's prior record of criminal convictions and good behavior in prison in coming to the decision. At his parole hearing on July 20, 2017, the board decided to grant Simpson parole, with certain parole conditions such as travel restrictions, non-contact with co-defendants from the robbery, and not drinking excessively. He was released on October 1, having served almost 9 years. In December 2021, Simpson was granted an early discharge from parole by the Nevada Division of Parole and Probation for good behavior. In May 2023, Simpson reported that he had been diagnosed with cancer and expressed confidence that he would beat it. He also said he started chemotherapy. In February 2024, it was reported that Simpson was undergoing treatment for prostate cancer. A week and a half before his death, Simpson canceled a scheduled memorabilia signing because he was not feeling well. In the final days before his death, all of Simpson's children visited him. He died of the disease on April 10, 2024, at the age of 76. At the time, Simpson had been living in Las Vegas, right next to the Rhodes Ranch Golf Club. It was announced that his body will be cremated in Las Vegas. Scientists had requested for Simpson's brain to be studied for signs of CTE, but the Simpson estate refused. The executor of Simpson's estate initially announced plans to fight the estate's money going to the Brown and Goldman families, but reversed course soon after. I hope you all have a great day today. And this is all I have for this case. Thank you so much for watching, and if you enjoyed, please subscribe and leave a thumbs up down below, and thanks for watching once again.